So, this happened 7 months ago, but I'm finally ready to tell this story because holy hell, what a ride it's been. My parents died in a car accident on March 15th. Dad was 67. Mom was 64. They were driving home from their anniversary dinner when some drunk driver ran a red light. Both gone instantly. I was adopted when I was 6 months old, but they raised me like I was their biological son, or so I thought. My older siblings, Warren and Lucy, always treated me differently. Warren's 34, Lucy's 32. I'm 28. Growing up, there were always these little comments about how I looked nothing like the family, how I was lucky Mom and Dad took pity on me, how I should be more grateful. I brushed it off as typical sibling stuff, but looking back, the signs were everywhere. The funeral was scheduled for March 22nd. I spent the week helping arrange everything while Warren and Lucy were supposedly too grief-stricken to handle the details. I picked the caskets, wrote the obituaries, coordinated with the funeral home, contacted relatives. They showed up to approve my choices, and left. Should have been my first clue. The service was packed. Mom and Dad had tons of friends from their church. Dad's old job at the hardware store, Mom's book club. I gave the eulogy because Warren said he was too emotional, and Lucy claimed she had anxiety about public speaking. I talked about how they taught me the value of hard work, how they supported my business degree, how they were proud when I started my consulting firm 3 years ago. After the service, everyone was invited back to the house for the reception. I rode with our Aunt Kelly to help set up food. Warren and Lucy said they needed to run a quick errand first and would meet us there. We pulled into the driveway around 4 p.m. and I immediately knew something was wrong. The spare key wasn't under the fake rock where it had been for 15 years. I tried my key in the front door and it didn't work. Kelly tried hers too. She used to water their plants when they traveled. Nothing. I called Warren. He picked up on the first ring like he was waiting. Warren told me they had changed the locks for security reasons after the funeral. Too many people had keys floating around and they needed to protect the estate. He said I could get my personal items later, but they needed to secure the house first. I asked him what he meant by later and when I could get my things. Lucy grabbed the phone and said they were the biological children and needed time to process their grief without distractions. She said I could contact them in a few days to arrange a time. I hung up and Aunt Kelly was staring at me like I had grown a second head. She asked what that was about and I told her what they said. She got this look on her face and said she never realized how cruel they could be. The relatives started arriving for the reception and we had to explain that the house was locked and we couldn't get in. Awkward doesn't begin to cover it. Uncle Anderson drove to Warren's apartment to ask what was going on, but Warren wouldn't answer the door. That evening around 8 p.m., I got a group text from Warren and Lucy. It said, "Now that the show is over, it's time for some honesty. You were just a charity case they pitted. Adopted trash doesn't inherit from real family." Warren added another message right after. "Mom only kept you out of guilt. Even on her deathbed at the hospital, she called you her biggest mistake. Said she should have given you back when you were acting out at age 7. Then Lucy piled on. Dad's last words were about his real children and how he hoped would be okay financially. He didn't even remember your name in those final moments. He called you that boy we took in." I stared at my phone, reading these messages over and over. 3 years of building my consulting business, working 60-hour weeks, saving money, buying my condo. 3 years of having a plan for exactly this moment. See, I knew this day would come eventually. I've been waiting for Warren and Lucy to show their true colors since I was 16 and overheard them talking about how much easier their lives would be when Mom and Dad died and they inherited everything. I typed back one sentence. "I understand. Keep everything." Warren responded immediately. "Smart choice. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Lucy sent, "Finally some maturity from you. We were worried you'd try to cause problems." Then an hour later, Lucy sent a photo. It was a picture of them in the backyard with a fire going in Dad's old metal trash can. They were holding stacks of my childhood photos, school pictures, art projects Mom had saved, even my high school diploma. The flames were already consuming everything. Lucy's text with the photo said, Good thing you agreed because we already sold your bedroom furniture to pay for our inheritance party this weekend. Don't ever contact this family again. We're blocking your number after this." Warren added, "The locks are changed, your stuff is gone, and your room is empty. You were never really part of this family anyway." I sat in my condo that night with my laptop open looking at the documents I had prepared 3 years ago when I first started making real money. The private investigator reports about Warren's gambling debts. The financial records I had quietly obtained showing Lucy's credit card problems. The business connections I had carefully cultivated. The legal groundwork I had already laid. They thought they were so smart. They thought they had one. But here's what Warren and Lucy didn't know. I had spent years getting ready for this exact scenario. While they were coasting through their dead-end jobs and racking up debt, I was building something much bigger than they could imagine. 7 days after the funeral, I got a call from Mom and Dad's estate lawyer asking me to come to his office for the will reading. Update 1. Holy crap, you guys. The comments on my last post on Once Loyal were incredible, and some of you called exactly what was about to happen. Shout out to the person who said my siblings were about to get the shock of their lives. You were spot on. So, remember how I ended the last post mentioning the estate lawyer called me? Yeah, that meeting happened this morning and I'm still processing everything that went down. I showed up to the lawyer's office at 10 a.m. like he requested. The office is in this old building downtown that smells like leather and coffee. Warren and Lucy were already there sitting in these fancy chairs looking like they owned the place. Lucy was wearing Mom's pearl necklace and Warren had on Dad's expensive watch. They barely looked at me when I walked in. The lawyer, Anderson Fitzgerald, is this older guy who's been handling legal stuff for my parents since before I was adopted. He knew me when I was a kid and always treated me the same as Warren and Lucy during the few times I met him over the years. Anderson opened up this thick folder and pulled out the will. He started with all the standard legal language about sound mind and body and all that. Warren was tapping his foot impatiently, and Lucy kept checking her phone like she had better places to be. Then Anderson got to the actual bequests. He read about some smaller items first. Mom's jewelry collection to Lucy, Dad's tools and workshop stuff to Warren, some money to the church, and a few charities. Warren and Lucy were nodding along like this was all expected. Then Anderson cleared his throat and said, "The house and all remaining assets were left to me. The adopted son, who they loved as their own and wanted to ensure was taken care of after they were gone." The silence in that room was deafening. Lucy's mouth literally fell open and Warren started shaking his head like he hadn't heard correctly. Warren stood up and told Anderson there had to be some mistake. He said there was no way Mom and Dad would leave everything to the adopted kid when they had 2 biological children who needed that inheritance. He demanded to see the will document itself. Anderson handed Warren the will and he started reading it frantically. Lucy grabbed it from him and they were both scanning every page like they could find some loophole or error. Lucy looked up and said this wasn't the real will. She claimed Mom and Dad had talked to her just last month about making sure Warren got the house since he was the eldest son. She said there must be a newer version somewhere that Anderson didn't know about. Anderson explained that this will was dated 18 months ago and had been properly witnessed and notarized. He said my parents had specifically come to update it after my consulting business started taking off. Apparently, they wanted to make sure I inherited the house because they knew Warren and Lucy were both struggling financially and didn't want family pressure to force me to sell it to bail them out. That's when Warren started getting really aggressive. He told Anderson that I had obviously manipulated Mom and Dad into changing their will. He said I probably convinced them that he and Lucy didn't deserve anything because I was the golden child who went to college and started a business. I finally spoke up and said I had no idea what was in the will until today. I told them I never asked Mom and Dad for anything and built my business entirely on my own. Lucy jumped in and said that was exactly the problem. She said, he acted like he was so much better than them with his college degree and his fancy condo. She said, Mom and Dad got brainwashed into thinking he was more successful and deserving than their real children. Warren added that they had both sacrificed for the family in ways I didn't understand. He said, when he got adopted, suddenly all the attention and resources went to him. He claimed he gave up college to help Dad at the hardware store so they could afford my private school tuition. And Lucy took care of Mom during her depression years while I was away at university. I asked Warren why he never told me he gave up college for me. He said it wasn't my job to worry about family sacrifices back then, but now I needed to do the right thing and split the inheritance equally. Lucy agreed and said the fair thing would be to sell the house and divide everything 3 ways. She said blood family should come first, and I got plenty of advantages growing up that they didn't. Anderson interrupted and said the will was legally binding and there was no requirement for me to share anything. He said if they wanted to contest it, they would need to hire their own lawyer and prove undue influence or mental incapacity, which would be extremely difficult given the circumstances. Warren asked Anderson how much the house and remaining assets were worth total. Anderson said he couldn't give exact figures without a full appraisal, but estimated the house alone was worth around $400,000 and there were additional savings and investments. Lucy started crying at that point. Real tears, not the fake ones from the funeral. She said she had credit card debt and couldn't afford her rent much longer. She begged me to be reasonable and remember that we were family regardless of blood. Warren tried a different approach. He said he understood why Mom and Dad left me the house, but suggested I could take out a mortgage against it to give them each $50,000. He said that would be enough to help them get back on their feet without requiring me to sell. I looked at both of them sitting there desperate and pleading and realized this was the moment I had been preparing for since I was 16. This was why I spent 3 years researching their finances, building my business connections, and setting up my revenge plan. I told them I needed time to think about everything and would get back to them within a week. Warren grabbed my arm as I was leaving and said I better do the right thing for family. But here's what they still don't understand. I already know exactly what I'm going to do and it's not what they're expecting. The real game is just getting started and they have no idea what's coming. Update 2. You guys are not going to believe what happened when I met with Warren and Lucy yesterday. Some of you in the comments on Once Loyal figured out I had more planned and you were absolutely right. This got so much messier and more satisfying than I expected. So, I called Warren 3 days after the will reading and told him I was ready to discuss the inheritance situation. He immediately got excited and said they could meet me anywhere I wanted. I suggested the coffee shop downtown where we used to go with Mom and Dad sometimes. Neutral territory. They showed up 15 minutes early and had already ordered drinks. Lucy was wearing this dress I recognized as one she bought for job interviews last year. Warren had gotten a haircut and was dressed nicer than I'd seen him in months. They were clearly trying to make a good impression. I sat down and Warren started talking immediately about how grateful they were that I was willing to work with them. He said family should stick together, especially during difficult times like this. Lucy nodded along and said they never meant to hurt my feelings with what they said after the funeral. I let them talk for about 5 minutes about family loyalty, doing right by each other. Then I pulled out the folder I had brought with me and set it on the table. I told them we needed to have a completely honest conversation before I made any decisions about the inheritance. I said there were some things I needed them to explain first. Warren asked what I meant and I opened the folder. I pulled out the first document, which was a credit report I had obtained for Lucy 3 months ago. I slid it across the table and asked her to explain why she owed $47,000 on credit cards with minimum payments she couldn't afford. Lucy's face went completely white. She asked me how I got her credit information and why I was checking up on her finances. She said that was a violation of her privacy and none of my business. I told her it became my business when she and Warren decided to treat me like garbage for my entire life and then demand inheritance money they didn't earn. I said, I've been watching both of them for years, waiting for them to show their true colors. Warren tried to intervene and said, we should focus on moving forward, not bringing up old grievances. I pulled out the second document, which showed his gambling losses from the casino over the past 18 months. $12,000 lost on blackjack and poker games. Warren stared at the paper and asked me if I hired some kind of investigator to spy on them. He said this was insane behavior and proved I had serious trust issues. He claimed the gambling was just occasional entertainment and I was making it sound worse than it was. Lucy jumped in and said the credit card debt was from medical expenses when she had to get her teeth fixed last year. She said she was working 2 jobs trying to pay it down and didn't need me judging her financial decisions. I told Warren that occasional entertainment doesn't result in bounced checks to the casino cashier, which I also had documentation of. I told Lucy that medical expenses don't explain the $5,000 she spent at designer clothing stores or the $3,000 she spent on a vacation to Florida. That's when they both started getting really defensive. Warren said I was acting like some kind of stalker and this whole conversation was inappropriate. He said normal brothers don't investigate each other's private lives like this. Lucy accused me of being jealous that they had more fun in their lives while I was busy being boring and responsible. She said maybe if I learned how to enjoy myself, I wouldn't be so bitter about everything. I asked them if they wanted to know why I started gathering this information in the first place. I told them about the conversation I overheard when I was 16 where they were planning how to split Mom and Dad's money after they died. Warren was talking about selling the house immediately and Lucy was calculating how much they could get for Dad's tools and Mom's jewelry. Lucy even joked about donating my stuff to charity since I wouldn't be around to claim it anyway. Warren denied ever having that conversation. He said I was making up stories to justify my weird obsession with their finances. He claimed I was probably having some kind of mental breakdown from grief and wasn't thinking clearly. I pulled out my phone and played another recording from 2 years ago when they thought I was in the bathroom during Christmas dinner. Warren was telling Uncle Anderson that I acted like I owned the place and needed to remember my position in the family. Lucy laughed and said at least when Mom and Dad died, they wouldn't have to pretend to include me anymore. The silence at the coffee shop table stretched for almost a minute. Other customers were starting to look over at us. Lucy's face was completely red and Warren was staring at his hands. Warren finally said the recording was illegal and proved I was mentally unbalanced. He said normal people don't secretly record family members for years. He claimed this showed I had serious psychological problems and couldn't be trusted with major decisions like inheritance. I told him I learned to protect myself because nobody else in the family ever did. I said, when you grow up knowing your siblings are waiting for your parents to die so they can get rid of you, you start paying attention to details. Lucy tried a different approach and said maybe they all said things over the years that were hurtful. She said families go through rough patches and hold grudges, but the important thing was learning to forgive and move forward together. She said the inheritance situation was a chance for all of them to start fresh. I reminded them about my college graduation where they left the ceremony early and didn't come to the dinner celebration. I brought up my housewarming party where they showed up 2 hours late and spent the whole time complaining about the neighborhood. I mentioned Lucy's wedding where she seated me at the kids' table with the cousins under 12 years old. Lucy said those were all misunderstandings or practical decisions that had nothing to do with how they felt about me. She said I was creating patterns and conspiracies where none existed. She claimed I was so focused on finding rejection that I couldn't see the times they tried to include me. Warren nodded and said this was exactly the problem with my personality. He said I turned every normal family interaction into evidence of some grand plot against me. He said healthy people don't keep score of every slight or perceived insult over decades. I told them they were right that I keep score. I said when you're told your entire childhood that you should be grateful for everything because you're not really family, you learn to pay attention to how people treat you. I said I've been keeping very detailed scores for years and they were losing badly. I pulled out my phone and showed them the recording app. I told them I've been recording our conversations for the past 3 years. Whenever we interact at family gatherings, I played back a clip from last Christmas where Warren was complaining to Lucy about how much money Mom and Dad spent on my business degree compared to what they spent on them. Lucy grabbed for my phone and said I had no right to record private family conversations without permission. She said this proved I was completely untrustworthy and had been planning to hurt them for years. Warren said this whole thing explained why I never seemed to care about family relationships. He said I was always calculating and cold, and now he understood I was just gathering ammunition against them. I asked them why they thought I should care about family relationships when they spent my entire childhood making me feel like an outsider. I brought up specific incidents like when they told their friends I wasn't their real brother, when they excluded me from family photos, when they convinced Mom and Dad not to put my name on the Christmas stockings because I wasn't really family. Lucy said those were just kids being kids and I was holding grudges about normal sibling rivalry. She said I turned into this vengeful person who couldn't let go of childhood stuff that didn't even matter anymore. Warren agreed and said the problem was I never learned how to be part of a family because I was always keeping score and looking for reasons to feel victimized. He said real family members forgive each other and move on. I told them they were about to find out exactly how much their childhood behavior mattered. I explained that I had contacted both of their landlords, their credit card companies, and their employers over the past week. I said I had a lot of influence in this town through my business connections, and they were going to discover how much their financial situations were about to change. Warren asked what I meant by that, and I told him his landlord was very interested to learn about his gambling problems. When I mentioned I was concerned about his ability to make rent payments, I told Lucy her boss at the retail store was curious about why she needed so many days off when she claimed to be working 2 jobs. Lucy started crying and said I was trying to destroy their lives over stupid childhood fights. She said they were sorry for how they treated me growing up and sorry for what they said after the funeral. She begged me to stop whatever I was planning and just take the inheritance money. Warren was getting angrier and said I was becoming exactly the kind of person who proved I never belonged in the family anyway. He said Mom and Dad would be ashamed of how vindictive and cruel I was being to my own siblings. I stood up and told them this was just the beginning. I said they had spent 22 years teaching me that family doesn't matter and blood doesn't make you loyal. Now they were going to learn what happens when someone takes that lesson to heart. As I was leaving, Warren grabbed my arm and said we weren't finished talking. I told him we were finished talking, but we weren't finished with each other. Not even close. Final update. Holy hell, you guys. The comments telling me to update immediately on Once Loyal were right. This got nuclear fast, and I'm still processing everything that went down. Some of you predicted exactly what was going to happen, and you were spot on about the panic messages. So, remember how I ended the last update saying the real game was just getting started? Yeah. Turns out I underestimated how quickly everything would fall apart for Warren and Lucy once I started making those phone calls. The first domino fell exactly 3 days after our coffee shop confrontation. Lucy called me at 7 a.m. crying hysterically. She said her boss at the retail store had fired her for lying on her employment application about her previous job history. Apparently, when I mentioned to him that she might not be the most reliable employee, he decided to do some checking and found out she had been terminated from 2 previous jobs for attendance issues, not the voluntary resignations she claimed. Lucy was screaming at me through tears, asking why I would destroy her job when she was already struggling financially. She said I was being cruel and vindictive over childhood grudges that didn't matter anymore. She begged me to call her boss and explain that I was just upset about family drama and didn't mean what I said. I told Lucy that I meant every word I said, and this was exactly what she deserved for 22 years of treating me like garbage. I said she should have thought about job security before she decided to burn my childhood photos and tell me I wasn't real family. She hung up on me but called back an hour later. This time she was trying to be strategic instead of emotional. She said if I helped her get her job back, she would split her portion of any inheritance money with me 50/50ths. She said we could work together as a team and put the past behind us. I asked Lucy why she thought I needed her money when I was the one who inherited everything. She said Warren had been talking to some lawyers about contesting the will and they thought they had a good case for undue influence. She said if I helped them now, they would drop the legal challenge and we could all be a family again. That made me laugh out loud. I told Lucy that Anderson Fitzgerald was one of the most respected estate lawyers in the state and had been preparing for exactly this kind of challenge from them for months. I said, good luck finding a lawyer willing to take their case when they had no money for legal fees. 2 days later, Warren called me around 10 p.m. He was drunk and angry. He said his landlord had given him 30 days' notice to vacate his apartment. Apparently, the landlord was concerned about Warren's gambling habits after I mentioned it might affect his rent payments. Warren said the landlord claimed he needed to rent to more stable tenants and was using some clause in the lease about financial instability. Warren accused me of deliberately sabotaging his housing situation when I knew he couldn't afford to move. He said I was trying to make him homeless over stupid sibling rivalry. He demanded I call his landlord and take back whatever lies I told about his gambling. I told Warren those weren't lies. They were documented facts from casino records that I had copies of. I said if he wanted stable housing, maybe he shouldn't have blown $12,000 on blackjack in 18 months. Warren got more aggressive and said I was destroying his life because I was jealous that Mom and Dad loved their real children more than their adopted charity case. He said, "You never got over being second choice and were taking it out on him and Lucy now that our parents couldn't protect them anymore." I asked Warren if Mom and Dad loved him so much, why did they leave him nothing in their will? I said, maybe they figured out what kind of person he really was before they died. Warren started yelling that I had manipulated Mom and Dad against their own biological children. He said I probably convinced them to change the will by lying about him and Lucy. He claimed I was a master manipulator who spent years turning our parents against their real family. I told Warren that Mom and Dad changed their will 18 months before they died, long before any of the recent drama. I said they saw exactly who he and Lucy were and made their decision accordingly. I said the only manipulation was Warren and Lucy spending decades making me feel like an outsider in my own family. The phone calls kept coming over the next week. Sometimes it was Lucy crying and begging. Sometimes it was Warren threatening and demanding. Sometimes they tag-teamed me with both of them on speakerphone trying different tactics. Lucy tried the guilt approach, talking about how we were all grieving and should stick together as a family. Warren tried intimidation, saying I was going to regret destroying family relationships over money. Then Lucy would switch to anger, accusing me of being a sociopath who planned this revenge for years. Then Warren would try bargaining, offering to split everything 3 ways if I would just stop whatever I was doing to hurt them. But the real panic started when Lucy lost her apartment. Her landlord had called her previous landlords as references after I mentioned concerns about her ability to pay rent consistently. Turns out she had been late on rent payments at 3 different places and had been evicted once before for non-payment. Her current lease had a clause about providing accurate rental history. Lucy called me sobbing at midnight saying she had nowhere to go. She said Warren couldn't take her in because he was getting evicted, too. She begged me to let her stay in Mom and Dad's house just temporarily while she figured out her next steps. I told Lucy that was my house now and she wasn't welcome there. I reminded her that she had burned all my childhood photos and told me never to contact the family again. I said she was finally getting her wish to cut me out of her life completely. That's when my DMs exploded. 45 messages over 2 days from various combinations of Warren and Lucy. Screenshots, voice messages, long typed rants, short desperate pleas. They were panicking because both of their credit card companies had reduced their credit limits after I mentioned concerns about their debt-to-income ratios through my business connections. The messages started desperate. Lucy writing entire paragraphs about how sorry she was for everything she ever said or did to hurt me. Warren admitting that maybe they had treated me unfairly growing up, but insisting that destroying their lives wasn't the answer. Then they got strategic. Warren claiming he had found evidence that the will was forged and threatening to take me to court. Lucy saying she had recorded our coffee shop conversation and was going to prove I was harassing them. Then they got pathetic. Both of them offering to do anything I wanted if I would just stop ruining their lives. Warren saying he would get addiction counseling for his gambling if I would call off whatever campaign I was running against them. Lucy promising to get her finances together and become a better person if I would just give her another chance. The final messages were just broken. Warren admitting he was sleeping in his car. Lucy saying she was staying at a shelter and had lost £15 because she couldn't afford to eat regularly. Both of them begging me to remember that we were family and asking how I could watch my own siblings become homeless. I read every single message without responding to any of them. This was exactly what I had been planning for 3 years. Every business connection I had cultivated, every piece of information I had gathered, every strategic relationship I had built was for this exact moment. See, what Warren and Lucy never understood was that treating someone like an outsider for their entire childhood teaches them to become self-reliant. While they were coasting on the assumption that family would always bail them out, I was building a life where I didn't need anyone. I spent years watching them make terrible financial decisions and destructive life choices, knowing that eventually there would be a reckoning. I knew that when Mom and Dad died, Warren and Lucy would show their true colors and expect me to just take it because we were family. But I also knew that their definition of family only worked one way. When they needed something, we were family and I should help. When I needed acceptance and belonging, I was just the adopted kid who should be grateful for whatever scraps they gave me. The beauty of my revenge was that I didn't break any laws or do anything technically wrong. I simply made sure the right people knew the truth about Warren and Lucy's financial situations and employment histories. Every landlord, employer, and creditor made their own decisions based on factual information. Warren and Lucy destroyed themselves. I just made sure there were consequences this time instead of Mom and Dad bailing them out like they always did before. 3 weeks after the coffee shop confrontation, I got one final message from Lucy. She said they were moving 2 states away to stay with some distant relatives who barely knew them. She said I had won and they hoped I was happy with what I had accomplished. I was happy. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely happy. Warren and Lucy taught me that blood doesn't make you family and that some people will always see you as less than them no matter what you do. They spent 22 years making sure I understood that lesson perfectly. I spent 3 years making sure they understood it too.